Hey everyone, welcome to On Tap. I'm Chris, and I'm not an expert, just a guy who enjoys good beer. Now, I did an episode previously on what exactly is a lager, and I went through a lot of different versions of what a lager can be. And let me tell you, there are a lot of different versions. Well, maybe you've seen the episode, and then you would know that. If you haven't, link is down below, and card is over here. So what I'm going to be doing in part 2 now is doing a taste test of each of these different styles of lager. I've picked 11 different beers, all of which represent a different version of what a lager can be, and I will be ranking them accordingly. Now, I will not be ranking them necessarily in relation to one another as far as sort of like bad to good or, worst to best per se, because I think they represent so many different styles, it's maybe a little unfair to do that. Rather, what I'm going to do is try to talk about how they taste relative to one another so you can get a sense of which style of lager might you prefer, and also if there are different styles of lager you maybe haven't had before that you'd like to try. So anyway, let's get to the episode. All right, so let's start with the first and in many ways, most classic type of lager, the Pilsner, especially the Pilsner that started it all, Pilsner Urquell. If you haven't seen the episode, link down below and card over there. Anyway, it's got quite a dry kind of hoppy nose to it. Let's give it a taste. And the characteristic of this beer is something that is very light, clean, and dry, with some slightly hoppy floral notes to it. It's a kind of beer that you think of when you think of not exactly classic beer, but something that's especially, shall we say, crisp and refreshing. There's just more of an edge to this one. It's got really, really strong hoppy notes to it. It's got kind of a dry, crisp feeling, and that, I think, in many ways, is what set this apart from what was considered, kind of a classic lager that existed before the development of the Pilsner. So yes, keynotes on this. Classic beer in the sense of what you'd think beer would taste like, but with really clear, sharp, dry, hoppy notes, slightly almost floral, sitting on top of that. Now, unlike the Pilsner Urquell, the original lager that would have existed sort of before this was invented was something much more akin to this, Weihenstephaner original lager. This doesn't have nearly the same sort of hoppy dryness in the aroma. This beer, like the Pilsner Urquell, it's very clean. It's a characteristic of sort of a non-Pilsner lager. It's extremely clean and it's extremely refreshing, but it's not as crisp, it's not as hoppy, it's not as dry. It's not sweet, but there's a much smoother sense to a classic lager rather than a Pilsner, or I should say a sort of a non-Pilsner lager. Maybe people would say that a Pilsner is a classic lager. Certainly that's the way the world has gone. So these two beers are very similar in kind of their flavor profiles. It's just that Pilsners are by definition going to have more hops to them. They're going to have that sharper hoppy edge. Non-Pilsner lagers are going to be much softer and they're going to be a little smoother, but they're still going to have that refreshing, kind of good, classic beer flavor to them. And they might even have a very, very, very tiny amount of sweetness to them. So third in the category of light lager is something that controversially is classified as American style lager. And see what an American style lager tastes like in comparison. So it's extraordinarily clear. And it really doesn't smell like very much. The thing about this beer relative to these two is how light it is and how, frankly, lacking in flavor it is. The stereotype, right? Sort of the negative stereotype, and I think it's frankly somewhat well earned, of a lot of American style lagers, and we're talking, the mass market stuff that this is included in. It's, maybe on the slightly higher end, right? It's maybe not Natty Ice, right? Or, Bud Light Lime or something, right? But it's in that general space. This is the kind of thing where you are not thinking about at all what you're drinking. This is just a beverage that you are consuming. It is extraordinarily light. Unfortunately, that is the stereotype that the category of American lager has. And when I say American lager, I mean a whole category of beer that is classified in the World Beer Cup as being, quote, American style lager. Like, that is a category that exists. So I wanted to address that. All right, so these are the three categories of light lagers. Now let's move into amber lager. And amber lager is really a single category, but I thought it just makes sense to pick Sam Adams. Sam Adams is just it's a classic Boston lager. And the thing about this that's different from the lighter lagers is it has more of a caramel smell to it in the aroma. Let's take a taste. So the difference between this amber lager, this is also sometimes called a Vienna style lager. So the idea of amber lager and Vienna style lager, very much kind of go together. So it's an amber Vienna style lager. So if you hear Vienna style lager, that's generally going to mean it's amber, or an amber style lager you can imagine is a Vienna style lager. And that very much applies to Sam Adams Boston lager. The characteristic note with a Vienna style lager, and again, I'm using this as a quintessential example, it's not from Vienna, it's from Boston, is a beer that has much more of a caramel kind of balanced sweetness to it. So the primary note on this is really a sort of balanced, slightly dry, slightly hoppy kind of caramel semi-sweetness, while still having the body one would associate with a lager, or these two lagers. So we've talked about light lagers and amber lagers. Let's talk about what are called dark lagers. Now, the most typical dark lager, I might argue, is something called a Dunkel, which just means dark in German. And it represents the style, I think, reasonably well. And you can see it's quite a dark, sort of an amber chestnut brown, and it's got sort of a sweetness to it. So it's interesting, a Dunkel, or at least the Hofbräu Dunkel, is sort of like if you took something like an amber lager, a Vienna lager, and you made it a little bit darker and just a little bit richer and smoother, and you sort of switched out caramel notes for more of just like a dark roasted malt kind of sweetness. It has some similarities to this, but it's a little bit, I almost want to say, not like it's rich and thick, but it's got a little bit more dark sweetness to it in a way that the Boston lager doesn't have. And it's quite nice to drink. So there are a couple more dark lagers aside from just what's called a Dunkel. One is sort of an Oktoberfest, but Oktoberfest is sort of in that general space. It almost depends on kind of the company who's making what. And we can even see that in the color, right? It's sort of an amber colored beer, quite similar to the Sam Adams. This one particularly doesn't have a lot of smell to it. This is a Spaten Oktoberfest, so characterizes this. The main note I would say on this is a real sort of malty grain sweetness to the beer. More so than this. This tastes like if you took this beer and you just made it more intense. You just made the sweetness more intense, you upped the alcohol content a little bit, not a ton, but a little bit, and you just made it slightly, not too much, but slightly thicker. You didn't at all go down the Pilsner route, right? There's almost no hoppiness in this or dryness in this, but you just made it a very smooth kind of malty, sweet beer, amber colored beer that overlaps in some ways with the Boston lager. That's kind of what you have with something like an Oktoberfest. So the final dark lager is something that is called a Schwarzbier. This is a really dark beer. This is almost like porter level in terms of the flavor profile. Like if you took the body of a lager, but you infuse the flavor of a porter into it, a really, really, really dark beer, that's what this tastes like. It's very smooth, it's very silky, it's a little dry, but like with a lager, it's very easy to drink. It doesn't feel heavy at all. It's a really interesting mix of dark beer flavors with lighter lager body. So we've now gone through what are classified as sort of dark lagers. There's one major category though that I really want to get into, and that is the category of Bocks. Now, I spoke about this in part one, as I said, but a Bock is basically a lager that's a bit higher strength, right? Think about these as sort of more like almost like turbo lagers, right? You're turning a beer into something that's just a bit more high octane. That's essentially what a Bock is. It's from Germany. There are 4 different kinds of Bocks that we're going to get into, which I'm very curious to see how these stack up against the other types of lagers. So anyway, we're now going to get into the final stretch and get into 4 different classifications of Bock, all of which are lagers. So first up, what we have is, from what I could find, just a simple Bock. And this is just sort of the most standard version, right, of what a Bock is. It's not a specific kind of Bock. We will get to those in a second. It's just a Bock. So there's not a single beer on this table that tastes exactly like this one. It has a flavor that's rather unique. How I would describe it is a beer that is medium in body, so it doesn't feel particularly dark or heavy, but it feels like it's a high octane, high alcohol, sweet, malty, dark amber beer. But from almost all of these, if you took individual elements from all of these 5 beers and you blended different parts of them together, that's what would give you something that I would describe as this Bock. You know, it's a very interesting and really enjoyable to drink mix of flavors. So we've tried a classic Bock, at least according to Enegren, but there are 3 more specialized types of Bocks that I would like to get into. The first of which is a Doppelbock. It's a Bock with extra alcohol in it. This is even darker, and it is very rich and full and thick, even in the aroma. That is a really nice beer. It is just dark and rich and full and malty and thick, and the sort of beer where where there's just a sense of alcohol woven in beautifully into this rich, luscious, and smooth, full flavor. This is an excellent beer, and I really love it. And it's so interesting to see what you can do with a lager. Like, you can take the same way of making beer as something like this, and you can turn it into something like this. That's shocking, really, in a way. It's really a testament to I think human ingenuity and the ability for us to figure out, you know, real interesting ways to create just wonderful beverages. So continuing on, we have a 3rd type of Bock, which is something called a Maibock, a Bock made for the month of May, the month of sort of the period of spring. Little lighter actually in color, and you can see this is more of a light amber. It's similar in color actually to the Sam Adams kind of Vienna lager, in terms of its coloration there, but it has the very rich, sort of smooth, sweet aroma of these 2 beers here. Very interesting. Let's give it a taste. You know, this is a fascinating experiment, actually, trying different forms of lager next to one another. So this is a beer that has the rich, slightly sweet fullness of something like this. It's a really interesting blend. It's sort of a medium to light-bodied beer in some sense, in this kind of area here, but it has the rich, full, smooth, slightly sweet, and, you know, I assume higher alcohol content. 7.5, you know, no big deal. So the Maibock is in this category, but it's like the lighter version of this style of beer, where it has some similarities to these over here, while still not sacrificing some of the, you know, kind of higher alcohol content aspects of these beers here. So let's get to our last one. There's a 4th Maibock that I want to get to, and in some ways it's the most unique, maybe, of the 4. Something called an Eisbock. Very, very dark kind of amber. This one is this is an Aventinus Eisbock made by Schneiderweisse. So this beer, this Eisbock, is 12% alcohol, meaning it is approaching wine level in terms of its strength. This almost smells like red wine in a weird way. Like if you took red wine and you mixed it with beer and a little bit of malty sweetness, that's what this has the smell of. Oh my God. This is like the Cabernet Sauvignon of beer. This is like the rich, full-bodied red wine version of beer. That's the best way I can describe this. It is really wonderful to drink. It's absolutely unique. It's not something I've ever had in terms of the body of beer. And like with wine, you can feel that there's a higher alcohol content mixed in with that body. They're all really interesting styles of beer, and it is fascinating to see in a single taste test what a lager can be. Something that is just light and you don't even almost think about what you're drinking. It's just so low calorie and kind of non-offensive and almost, I would say, like watery kind of beer flavor. Not quite light beer, but it's close there. Two beers that I think when we think of typical lagers, like your classic, just really well-made light lager beers, these two are here. Then you have lagers that are, amber color, right? Sort of they're not only amber color, they have a slightly different flavor. They're more a balance of a little bit of sweetness, a little bit of caramel, with still the baseline feeling of what a typical light lager is. Oktoberfest or a Festbier or Nelson is a little bit sweeter, a little bit stronger. Then you've got your Dunkel, which is a little bit more kind of like roasty malt kind of feeling in a sense of dark beer, but still with the body of a lighter beer. Then you've got your Schwarzbier, which is very smooth and silky, almost like a porter, really, but it still in a way has the body of a classic light lager. And then you've got your Bocks. You've got your classic Bock, which is rich and smooth and slightly sweet, but which is a beer that you can still kind of see where the original kind of body of a lager comes from. You've got your Maibocks, which are in some ways almost the most unique blend of all of these different types, where you've got the lighter body of things like, almost a Pilsner, not quite, but maybe a classic lager. And then you've got the higher alcohol content of the Bock with a bit of dryness. When we start getting into the really heavy stuff here, the Doppelbock is just rich and smooth and luscious and thick and high in alcohol and all of that good stuff. And then the Eisbock, which, as I said, that first drink I had, it is almost a Doppelbock with the element of red wine mixed in terms of its feeling of viscousness and thickness and richness and alcohol, sweetness, smoothness. So anyway, that's my assessment of this. Again, it's not quite an assessment, it's more just sort of a grouping of bottles that I've kind of haphazardly thrown about the table. Anyway, let me know in the comments, if you have a particular style of lager that you prefer, if there are styles that you haven't tried before that you'd like to get into. Yeah, if you want, subscribe to the channel. It really helps us make new content in the future. And I'll see you next time.